Talking about people who are coming from a place like Syria, which has no history of democracy, no history of human rights, no history of basic American rights like freedom of speech, no idea of what equality of the sexes looks like. There's going to be a culture clash. Look at Europe. Europe is full of culture clash because of the vast wave of Muslim immigration. So on those two levels, I'm extremely worried about the Syrian refugee wave. And by the way, question for the Ummah, right, the Muslim nation that is supposed to take everybody in. There are 1 billion Muslims on planet Earth, and there are 52 Islamic majority countries on planet Earth. None of you have room for these folks? None of you? Right? Turkey is taking in about 2 million of them. 15% are still in refugee camps. The truth is that the Ummah has a pretty poor record of taking in refugees. Right? For all the talk about how it's the Israelis who are victimizing the Palestinians, for example, there are still, 70 years later, 10 refugee camps in Jordan. There are 13 refugee camps full of Palestinians in Syria. There are refugee camps in the south of Lebanon for Palestinians 2 generations after the creation of Israel. By contrast, Israel has taken in every wave of Jewish refugees that has ever existed. So you know, I'm getting tired of hearing the sort of unearned moral superiority of the Muslim world when it comes to, oh, you Westerners, you have to take our refugees.
Could you please explain the unholy alliance between the left and the forces and the Muslim supremacists, considering that the premises and the principles of both of them are mutually incompatible?
Okay, so they're not mutually incompatible to point A, they are to point B. What I mean is that it's a timeline. The left wants to tear down Western civilization because it thinks it's unequal. The radical Muslims want to tear down Western civilization because they think it's evil. So to the point of tearing down Western civilization, they're pretty much on the same page. It's where they go from there that's a problem. Right? One side wants to build a caliphate and the other side wants to build a communist utopia. The reason that the left is routinely, and it's almost invariable, that the left ends up siding with the world's worst human beings in every situation is because, again, if you just go back to that fundamental leftist principle that equality of outcome is all that matters in life, that equality of outcome means that something just is happening, think about it. The real world is a place where God designed it this way. I believe this. God designed it not for every individual, but certainly for the vast bulk of humanity. If you do responsible good things with your life, you will be more successful than if you do irresponsible bad things with your life. Well, if the left believes that people who are unsuccessful are more virtuous, then what that means is that the non-virtuous are more virtuous, right? Because the people who are unsuccessful are generally not doing good, responsible things, and the left says, well, those people are victims, let's help them. Right? So the Muslims in the Middle East are victims of Israel. They must be victims of Israel because Israel's rich and its neighbors are not. So they must be victims. Well, the real reason the Muslims, the Palestinian Muslims, for example, are poor is because they've spent all the money that has been given to them, hundreds of billions of dollars, all the money that's been given to them over the course of decades, and they've spent it on terrorism, and they've spent it on stocking it away in their bank accounts of Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, and they've spent it on garbage, and they spent it on anti-Israel propaganda. That's the real reason they're poor. But the left looks at it and they say, they're poor. That means they're virtuous. This is why I hate it, really despise it, when Republicans do the whole, I'm a better person because I have a rags to riches story. You weren't a better person when you're poor. Okay, no one is a better person just because they're poor. By the way, no one's a better person because they're rich. All that wealth is a measure of how many voluntary exchanges you engaged in a free market. That's all that wealth is. But the idea for the left is that all inequality is evil. Therefore, the people who are unequal at the top are evil and the people at the bottom are virtuous. Which is why you'll hear people on the left say things like they like small business, but they hate people who are big business, like the Walmart family, right? The Walton family. They're terrible. Well, were they terrible when they were just a family living in the middle of nowhere? When exactly did they transition over into evil? Right? When they became successful enough, because their success meant, by necessity, according to the leftist worldview, they were depriving others of their fair share. And Bernie Sanders said this right after winning New Hampshire the other night. And this is Bernie Sanders' entire thing. He says the principle of America is the principle of fairness, which makes me want to vomit and never stop vomiting. The principle of America is not fairness of outcome. And he was talking about fairness of outcome. He said, oh, it's unfair that 1% of the population lives with more wealth than 90% of the rest of the population. And well, maybe, or maybe it's not unfair, because it turns out that 1% of the population is hiring the other 90% of the population to actually provide their services and labor.
As like an immigrant, a Muslim, fairly liberal person, I think this is probably the best event that I've been able to access, just because I'm not sitting in the audience and nodding for an hour.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I really do appreciate the platform for free dialogue. I think it's extremely important for there to be free speech so the good ideas sort of crowd out the bad ones. The reason I'm kind of here today is because, while I was sitting there, and I've noticed this in a lot of your videos, which I do spend some time watching.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Definitely entertaining, yeah. So, like yesterday, right before coming here, or before I slept, I watched you on Piers Morgan talking about gun control. I heard you for an hour today, and I think what I realized is I think the first step is talking about free speech, and I think the left can definitely work on that. The second step is using solid, sound, evidence for your speech so that truly you have good ideas crowding out the bad. And I just wanted to take issue with a few things that you mentioned that I felt were a bit more sensational, a bit more, I know you're from like a lawyer background, so I can see.
No, go for it.
Yeah, so like you mentioned for rape on college campuses from 1995 to 2002 was the statistic you used.
Because those are the last available statistics from the BJS.
Sure. So there's current statistics that you think have, methods that are unjustified because it's self-identified, but that's contemporary, and you're looking at something that started 20 years ago, and then making up for the caveat that, okay, it's self-identified, so it might not actually reach that amount. So what I'm saying is clearly we don't have sound data on this, and maybe not all of the self-identified reports are justified, but using a statistic that's 20 years old, even if it's the most contemporary one that you have, is, I think, unsound in terms of academic.
So I agree with you. I'd like to have better statistics. Now let me ask you a question on that. Do you think that the rape rate in the United States on college campuses is closer to 6 in 1,000 or 250 in 1,000?
I definitely think it's somewhere in between, and I don't think I have.
No, but I mean, like, if you had to try and peg a number. I mean, I understand that I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here.
Sure. I'd like to iterate. I'm not a scientist or a statistician, and I don't claim to or posture to be, and I don't think you should either. If you don't have statistics,
Do you think that it has increased 10,000%?
What I'm saying is, for you to criticize a certain community of using a statistic 1 out of 5 as sensational or ridiculous,
because the people who actually created that statistic say that it's being